Hi, welcome back. This is episode 2, Pathways and Patterns, Choosing the Right Modernization Approach. This is part of our Mainframe Modernization to Cloud, Atos and AWS podcast, and it's the Road to AWS reInvent 2025, which is over in Vegas at the end of November at the start of December as well. So recap of episode 1, we talked around the mainframe to cloud, predominantly around the assessment and being able to do an assessment within 1 month to be able to understand the point of view around the workloads on mainframe, point in time, and tie that to business outcomes as well. Episode 2 is more around, okay, let's look at the structural elements of the methodologies that we should consider around mainframe to cloud modernization and migration. And that could be around the 7 R's of rehost, relocate, replatform, refactor, repurchase, retain, and retire. And I think we may have an 8th because we love the reimagine as well, because that's about driving innovation, which is at the forefront of AWS and Atos customer journey capabilities. So I'm joined today with Vivek Jindal, who's our Global Vice President at Atos for modernization. And we also have our Global Head of Mainframe Modernization, which is Raul Pachamati. So, Raul, Vivek, great to see you again as part of episode 2. Absolutely loved episode 1 around the assessment. Why don't we kick off for episode 2 for our listeners today? And kind of let me kick off around maybe one for you, Raul, to kick off. You know, how do I determine the best approach for workload migration and modernization for mainframe to cloud? What's the 7 R's? What is all of this about? Why don't you step us through that, Raul? Over to you, sir.
Yeah. So I briefly touched on this in the first episode. Hi, Simon and Vivek. Nice to see you again in the second episode. See, 7 R's are basically as different approaches customers take, right? Let's walk through this within the context of the mainframe customer. So the first thing we do is we basically sit down and try to understand what are the business objectives of the customer. And let's take an insurance customer. And many of the insurance customers in the insurance industry, the first thing they'll say is, our number one objective is to reduce the cost of our operations, and we'll be able to run these applications efficiently. And we want to cut down our cost by 50%, as simple as that. And so the number one objective for them is cost reduction, and the faster they do it, that's better. So for them, rehosting and replatform will be the right choice, because for them, they're okay with COBOL because most of the times it's a run the engine after you sell the policy, because you just want to kind of maintain the policy until the end of the policy duration. But if you talk to another customer, they could probably will be saying that my biggest concern today is basically I lack the assembler and the programmers to maintain my end of the day settlement process, and my last one is retiring, and I really need to reduce the risk of it. And for them, we probably will have to say, how do we optimize the acceleration of the exit by eliminating the assembler technologies in their clearing and settlement process. That could be as good as refactor, taking assembler and convert that into the target language, Java, or whatever that is. But another customer might be saying that, hey, today, how I process my underwriting processes, for example, how do I take my credit card application? It takes probably asking like tons of questions to the customer, going through screen after screen. And I really want to optimize this into a very highly digital native application where I'll be able to ask 5 or 6 questions and quickly get going on approving the customer for the credit card, right? And how do I optimize those customer experiences? You have to rethink and reimagine the customer experience in this case. It's not like for like modernization. You cannot lift and shift in that case. So as I clearly explained, depending on whether you're reducing your cost or you are eliminating a specific technology in your landscape, or whether you're completely rethinking the customer experience, your 7 R's will apply into the customer objectives, and then we'll sit down and explain which is the right solution to achieve that business object.
I mean, that's really good around kind of how to kind of position and look at those different scenarios. whether it's looking at rehosting, which is predominantly around cost reduction, the optimization or refactoring, and maybe looking at the business logic and the functional attributes of kind of reimagining and re-architecting the workload. And thinking of that, Vivek, in mind, how do I potentially look to accelerate that kind of across those different scenarios? I keep hearing about generative AI and AI. It's gonna change the world. And kind of looking at those scenarios around some of the tool sets that you've led and you've built, specifically around AI. Where does that AI kind of infusion or AI driven capability enhance the delivery of those different scenarios?
Sure. So first and foremost, great to be back on the podcast. Thoroughly enjoyed the first one. Um, and I think to your question, today in the world that we are living in, uh, nothing without a mention of AI is complete. So, and obviously we being in the heart of the technology industry, uh, have made sure that we are abreast with all the technology changes that are happening. However, we've taken a very pragmatic approach in terms of using and leveraging AI to make sure that we are not getting carried away by the hype, and have invested exactly where it makes sense for us to induce and inject AI, or any flavor of AI for that matter, whether AI, ML, Gen AI, or agentic AI, so that we are able to address and alleviate the specific pain points that customers face when they are doing any kind of mainframe modernization. So, as part of the assessment, we use significant amounts of intelligence based on extensive data that we already have, look at patterns where we can identify what are the connections that need to be made, what are the interdependencies, and then guide the customer on the right kind of cluster of applications that you can pick and choose to be able to successfully deliver your program. Now, once you've created a roadmap of transformation, uh, from an engineering activity standpoint, the the effort to refactor the code and the subsequent testing are two very critical elements which consume majority of the effort and time for any such program. And therefore, right at the start of 2023, we started working closely with AWS, when AWS had launched Code Whisperer, and then we went to Amazon Q, and now AWS Transform, and closely injected those variants into the different kinds of tools we had, specifically for mainframe, our Atos patented tool being Exit Legacy, where we've now brought in the power of AI to be able to probably reduce the overall time to transform standard COBOL code or other such technologies that you find on the mainframe by up to 70 to 80% at times. And similarly, when it comes to testing, the biggest challenge is how do you generate the test cases, how do you generate the test data, and then are able to ensure that you tested enough, because otherwise there is no end to testing, and you can keep on investing in testing without really moving the needle in terms of the accuracy. So, how do you identify the most optimized way of testing while leveraging the power of AI across the different phases of testing, is where we've invested heavily in our Atos platform, Polaris platform for testing. With the combined power of Atos and AWS, I think we are able to reduce at least by 50 to 60% the overall time and the cost for transformation of a mainframe modernization project. Now, let's come to an application which needs to be rewritten. The biggest challenge that customers have always faced is there is normally not enough documentation about how business rules have been implemented in applications which were built probably 30, 40 years ago, uh, or the availabilities of SMEs to be able to articulate and explain as to how these applications function. And that is where the power of generative AI becomes really, really phenomenal. And it helps you identify business rules that are embedded in the application. And then you are able to call out these business rules and also understand how the application functions to the extent that you are able to create user stories, which can then become the basis for actually regenerating or reimagining the application, which reduces the overall time for doing a rewrite very, very significantly. And then that works very well in combination with the Polaris platform for testing, to be able to ensure that you are able to deliver something at a price point within the timelines that the customer wants, and ensure that the quality is robust for such a business critical application. So I think AI, in a way, when rightly used, is a blessing, and its power needs to be harnessed effectively.
I mean, you kind of jumped to the point I was going to raise is when we look at the AWS platform, the Atos IP technology that's been able to bring to support the customer journey of modernization to cloud, that you can drive efficiencies of 78% around code regeneration, code generation, refactoring, replatform, and so forth. And the effort. One of the big things I hear from everyone is around gaining the application and business logic insights. And one of the challenges that, because of when we spoke around episode 1, was around the challenge around skills, and those skills are potentially looking to retire, or they're not so available, specifically things like the world of COBOL. One of the challenges has been around the skills. So what you said, Vivek, is great to hear around kind of almost like the let's call it the knowledge regeneration, and being able to document the application aspects. Well, what's your consideration there? Because it always seems to be a bit of the long pole in the tent, is getting in front of experts to be able to drive completeness of modernization to cloud. What's your view on that?
Yeah, so I'd like to start off with saying that what will AI do for me versus what can I do with AI? So the two different paradigms. So people who have been doing modernization for the last 8-9 years, around I started this mainframe modernization with, especially within the context of Reimagine, around 8 years back, 7. And when we did that, it was all about domain-driven design, microservices architecture, event-driven architecture. In order to do that, a bunch of people got together in a room for 3 full days, started whiteboarding, and started doing what the application do today, who are the personas, what are the use cases that we have to drive out of the mainframe, and what would be a domain-driven design and end architecture look like. That took weeks and weeks for us to understand, bringing the tribal knowledge, bringing the business into the room, and all of that. If you have to do that for 300,000, couple of 100 million lines of code application, it takes decades. And we can only do that one at a time, and we'll not be able to achieve our outcomes. I have seen dramatic improvements in how we can approach that problem in this differently. So let me explain this in a different context, right? Within the context of any legacy modernization, there are two phases. One is basically reverse engineering of what you have today. The next one is the forward engineering of what would the future look like. In both the cases, there is a very huge advancements where you really don't have to do all that manual effort of months and months. Let's start with the reverse engineering aspects of it. First, you have to understand what you have today, both as a technological landscape, like what are the things that this application does today, whether in terms of data validations, the input validation, output validation, mathematical calculations, whatever. What are the business logic that application includes, whether it is aligned to the customer specific or regulatory audit, whatever it is. Once you extract that business logic by using LLMs and various prompts, so you have to really kind of fine tune that. And AWS Transform is a tool that will definitely help you get there, along with Atos, other tools that we work together on that. And also in the context of the forward engineering, this is where actually the logic I explained about the domain-driven design. How do you decompose a domain? How do you identify right bounded context for a microservices architecture? What are the input-output events, and what are the input-output APIs that you need to architect the future state of the application? That is where spec-driven development like Kiro ID and QCLI and all of these things will come in handy for you. So that's why I'm saying, what can I do with AI is the new paradigm where I don't have to sit down and do all of this manually. I have these very much powerful tools and technologies, and these tools will continue to evolve, mature, and make your life easier. But you have to take advantage of these tools to both accelerate the reverse engineering with AWS Transform and accelerate the forward engineering with spec-driven development with Kiro ID and QCLI and other things, where I see 3x to 5x improvement as it sits today. And this is very early stage, still a day one for us. And we see a strong adoption of these technologies and these AI into these to accelerate the modernization.
I kind of love that kind of, how do you augment to accelerate and then be able to drive future state, strategies and technologies on the AWS and Atos platforms. So for me and the audience, we've heard very much episode 1 around how we drive the assessment. Now we're very much around the customer journey, around the modernization aspects, the scenarios into the cloud, how to augment AI to accelerate, how do we pivot towards future technologies, how do we consider around integration, things like APIs and so forth. This sounds wonderful. But how do I ensure that I don't have to have a rollback? Because it sounds great that everything moves forward with acceleration using these wonderful AI capabilities and tools, a very strong methodology, and then landing on a very strong global leader in public cloud with AWS. How do I kind of look at, not everything's guaranteed, but how do I reduce the need to roll back, right? Because once I go onto AWS, I want to stay on AWS. I don't want to kind of roll back and almost have to go back to the business to say, oh, this didn't go very well. I'm having to roll back all my applications back to the mainframe. So what kind of the strategies, considerations, and almost the kind of some level of guarantee to reduce those rollbacks? Vivek, I'm going to put you on point here for this one, because of your experience in doing a lot of these modernization programs. Why don't you kind of step me through kind of how you reduce the risk of rollback?
Sure. So I think we spoke about this briefly in our last episode. I think the success of any such complex program starts with building a strong and solid foundation. And in order to do that, for such a program, you need a very thorough analysis of what the landscape is. And as Rao mentioned, understanding the business objectives that the customer is driving, identifying the interdependency between the different systems, and therefore being able to carve out the scope that can be handled within the constraints that the customer offers you or provides to you in terms of time, cost, availability of people, dependency on other third parties, etc., etc. And then to be able to choose the right option. If you try to refactor an application which requires much more time or does not meet the functional requirements that the business might have from the application, then you will absolutely certainly end up not meeting the customer expectations. So therefore, choosing the right option, having a robust plan which identifies the do's and don'ts that every stakeholder needs to kind of adhere to during the course of the program, backed by a very strong foundation of tools which address the risk of the time it takes, the way to do the transformation, to analyze the code, and then to be able to successfully test the application code that has been generated in a manner where you are able to identify whatever risks that might be there or whatever errors that you introduce in process, rather than waiting for them to leak down to the time when actually you get into user acceptance, or even more scarier when you are into production. So that methodology, the marriage of the methodology between Atos and AWS, the combination and the power of the two tools that we bring to the table, backed by a scaled delivery capability through our centers spread across the globe, which specialize in delivery of such mainframe modernization projects, translates into uh, a high probability of success, because you've ensured that you've planned it well, you've got the right tooling and the methodology to be able to ensure success and identification of risk across the spectrum of the entire project lifecycle or the program lifecycle. That, I think, is the secret sauce for being able to deliver these programs, and that has resulted in where we are in terms of our legacy of maybe more than 24 months, where we've delivered multiple such programs successfully without having a need to roll back or even miss a single timeline that we have for mainframe modernizations.
Great. I think that's a good segue as well, because I always like to bring things to life on areas of work or any projects that may be ongoing or you've just completed from a customer standpoint. Well, you like Vivek, you do this on a daily basis, right? You're either doing multiple of these to AWS platform. Anything you want to kind of bring up in terms of any interesting projects that you're currently working on or you've just completed? What was the outcomes of that? What was kind of why don't you bring a use case to life around some recent modernization to cloud?
Yeah. So we have many success stories, but we could only name few public. And so I'll share a couple of success stories, and we can also share offline. So at the previous reInvent in 2024, we have actually 5 or 6 customers came on the stage and talked about their success stories of how they exited the mainframes. And for example, 2 customers, Goldman Sachs and Allianz, I'm kind of grouping them into a different pathways so that it's easy for everybody to understand, because we talk a lot about 7Rs and pathways. So Goldman Sachs and Allianz Global Insurance, they both talked about how they exited mainframes or on the way to exit the mainframe using the replatform or rehost approach. In this case, they are actually keeping the COBOL as is, but they are actually exiting the on-prem data center and mainframe and moving on to the cloud. And another set of customers that actually use the refactor, where they used automation tools to convert COBOL to Java, which is AWS Transform and Blue Edge in this case, which is Transamerica. This is a very unique use case where they presented at the reInvent, where they started a rewrite journey. 6 months later, they realized that this is going to take years to exit their mainframe. And they actually came to AWS and asked us how to support them. And we worked with them to exit their mainframe in 14 months. And they were able to shut down their mainframe. And this is another thing you talked about myths in the past, Simon. We were able to prove to the customer that the batches can run 50% faster. The application can reduce cost by 40%. And this is now completely shut down the mainframe. They used the automated tool to convert from COBOL to Java and exited in 14 months. And Toyota is another customer who is adopting to GenAI to extract the business rules and completely reimagining. They came and talked about the accelerations that they are gaining by adopting to these tools. They are actually completely reimagining their supply chain and parts management business. So there are many success stories like this. But since GenAI is kind of less than a year old, where adoption is completely new, but this is the first year on the road to the reInvent, you will start hearing the success stories coming out of the GenAI. So please stay tuned for what we are going to bring it up. And there are close to 7 or 8 stories we are aiming to present to the customers on how customers successfully transformed and exited their some workloads using the GenAI tooling. And looking forward to share those stories within the next few weeks. Yeah.
Brilliant. And for those which any of the audience which are gonna kind of land in Vegas and be at reInvent, Atos has a booth. Come and talk to us about mainframe modernization. There's plenty of sessions as well, as Roel stated in kind of at reInvent. So Vivek, clearly a lot of activity, specifically around when the rubber hits the road, so to speak. Any kind of use case you want to bring to life for the audience?
Yeah, sure. So while there are multiple use cases, I think I'll pick on one of the recent ones where we helped a major manufacturer of tires um, to shut down or implement their mainframe exit strategy. And the customer was actually had been wanting to do the same for quite some time, and themselves and were not able to achieve that target. And they were kind of stuck with uh, aging applications and ever increasing technical debt. Uh, and we then started with an assessment and helped them create uh, a strategy by identifying exactly what needed to be done. And about so these the whole exit required shutting down of 4 applications and moving them to AWS. They were rehosted to AWS, and there was data archival that was required to be done for 29 applications which were being run from that mainframe. And in about 8 months' time, we were able to successfully complete the project, which included the complete migration of these applications, a successful parallel run once the applications had been migrated. And due credit to the team and our combined methodology between AWS and Atos that we were able to deliver that program successfully with zero defects post go live. And there was an interesting anecdote that one of the business users called up the technical team on the customer side and said, "Hey guys, you were supposed to actually migrate the applications to the cloud. What happened?" So the technical lead responded saying, "Hey, we've already migrated to the cloud." And the business guy said, I don't believe it, because there's no hue and cry. No business user is actually screaming and shouting that my application is not working. So it's a breath of fresh air. And I think that's what is the magic of Atos and AWS combined together, that we can drive our customers towards and deliver value successfully.
Brilliant. There should have been kind of some big video with maybe Darth Vader pressing the big red button, shutting the mainframe down, right? So, and then they could just play it back to the application owners. This has been another insightful session and another great episode of Patterns to Pathways, choosing the right modernization approach. Rahul, Vivek, thank you again for your time. I'm super excited for our next episode. Modernization, modernize and measurable outcomes, ops, and the road ahead. So, as I said, when the rubber hits the road, it gets going. So, I'm really excited about the next session. We've heard about the assessment in episode 1. We've gone through some real world examples, and specifically around the use of AI and augmenting the use of AI to accelerate innovation on the AWS platform with Atos services as well. So I've been Simon Willis. I'm Atos, and Vivek, Atos, and Roel from AWS. Super excited about the next episode. Please do lock and load in for our next episode, and we look forward to speaking with you then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.